So what's every Premier League club the worst at? Let's find out. Guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. Now, we did this for the Championship the other week, and I thought that it would be interesting to look into the Premier League. Obviously, we've got the 3 relegated clubs coming down to the Championship as well, which I was quite interested to look into. But I picked out one stat for every Premier League club that they've basically been at the bottom of the pile for this season. As always, if you're going to enjoy, make sure to leave a like. Got loads of fun things planned over the summer, so do stick around. But without any further ado, let's jump into this one. Starting out with Sheffield United. Now, when I say I had a list of stats that I could have used for Sheffield United, trust me when I say that there were a lot that I could have come with in today's video. They were at the bottom of the pile for quite a few of these statistics, but I picked out what I believe to be 3 of the most interesting ones. So Sheffield United on this previous season have had the worst shot conversion rate in the league. Only 4.4% of their shots have resulted in a goal, which is the worst in the Premier League. That's going to be something that they're going to need to brush up going into next season. Added on to that as well, they also have taken the fewest amounts of shots in the Premier League for this previous season, with only 323 shots. And to carry on compiling on the misery to Sheffield United on what has been this awful season for them, they've only scored 12 goals from open play, which is the lowest tally in the Premier League. West Brom weren't getting on the ball all too much in this last Premier League season. They made the fewest amount of passes in this season just gone by, only making 12,389 passes, which is the fewest amount in the Premier League. To add on to that as well, they've also given away the most amount of penalties with 11, so that's obviously going to be something that they're going to look to rectify coming into this next Championship season, and they're just going to look to get on the ball a little bit more and take control again. With Fulham, it may be a question of their mentality, because they're the only Premier League side this season to never win after falling a goal behind. That's a real issue that Scott Parker is going to have to work with this group, probably what's going to be a new group of players coming into this new Championship season, because to have that sort of bounce back ability and resilience when you do go a goal behind, not to crumble in those crunch matches where towards the end of the season at one point it really looked like Fulham had a chance for survival, especially after that brilliant performance away at Anfield. But from there on in, when that first goal went in, you could see the confidence drain from the players. Burnley haven't been a fan of leaving things late this season. They're the only team in the Premier League that's not scored in stoppage time of both the first and second half. So never scored after the 45-minute mark, and never scored this season after the 90-minute mark, which I thought was quite the interesting stat. They get their business done much sooner than that. To add on to that as well, Burnley also have the worst pass accuracy in the Premier League with 71.6%. Brighton have been shown the most red cards from this previous season, with 6 red cards being accumulated over the season. To add on to that as well, they've also dropped the most points from winning positions. A massive 25 points Brighton have dropped from winning positions this season, and you just think if they'd held on to a few more of them, what could have been possible for Brighton this season? I know they've got some great underlying numbers and things like that. A striker at times hasn't quite been there to finish off all the chances they've been creating, but that many points dropped from winning positions is really quite damning. Southampton this season have conceded the most amount of goals after the 90-minute mark, so as soon as that 90-minute mark goes, Southampton players need to keep their heads. They've conceded 6 goals after that 90-minute mark this season, which is the most in the Premier League. To add on to that as well, they've also had the fewest amounts of shots inside the 6-yard box this season, which I thought was quite the interesting stat, really. You know, Danny Ings hasn't quite been as prolific this time round as he had been previously. Maybe it's because he's not getting those chances closer in at goal where he can be that poacher in and around the box. Crystal Palace have been the most dispossessed side this season with 404 dispossessions, which is the most in the Premier League. Now, we had this stat on the Championship version we did, and that stat went to Reading. Basically, what this means is Crystal Palace like to get on the ball a lot and complete a lot of take-ons. They like to dribble a lot. Someone in there like an Iberieze obviously likes to pick up the ball from those deep positions and drive at defenders, and because of that, their side effect is going to be you're going to lose the ball a lot of the time as well. They've also conceded the most amount of goals in the first 15 minutes of matches out of any other Premier League side, conceding 12 goals in that time frame. Now for Wolves, other than Sheffield United this season, they have had the biggest drop-off in terms of league position from last season. Wolves have obviously become accustomed to finishing 7th in the Premier League, but this time round was quite the fall-off for them, finishing 13th in the Premier League. And like I say, apart from Sheffield United, that was the biggest fall-off in the Premier League. Wolves are a club at the moment who are trending downwards, and you do feel like this next next upcoming transfer window is absolutely crucial for Wolves. You know, given Nuno's departure and everything that goes along with that as well, the squad does need a bit of a freshen up within that spine, doesn't it? Maybe quite unsurprisingly so, Newcastle have had the fewest amounts of touches in the final third. They've only had 4,511 touches in the final third, which is the fewest in the Premier League this season. They've also had the fewest amount of touches in the opposition's penalty box as well. Only 637 touches the Newcastle players had in the opposition's penalty box this season, which is the lowest in the Premier League. Now, in the end, Newcastle did of course get over the line and secure their survival, but it was a bit of a slug of a season, wasn't it? Aston Villa have lost the most matches this season after taking the lead in them. 5 times this season where Villa have taken the lead and they've gone on to lose the match. That's going to be something that Dean Smith will look to rectify going into this summer. Don't get me wrong, this season for Aston Villa has been a massive improvement on the last one, but the one thing that you can't afford to do in football is stand still, so Villa will be looking to take more steps forward going into next season. Everton have had the fewest amounts of shots in the top half of the Premier League table this season, so for Everton's stat here, we're judging them up against all the other sides that finished in the top half of the table, and Everton were comfortably bottom for shots taken in that regard. Only 400 shots they've taken this season, Everton. Things started out under Carlo Ancelotti quite promisingly for them this season, didn't it? But as the year went on, it just sort of faded away. Injuries didn't help them in those attacking areas, and we're now at the situation where Carlo Ancelotti's been linked with a move back to Real Madrid. Leeds have conceded the most amount of goals from set pieces this season. Always a stat which gets brought up when we talk about Leeds defensively, isn't it? But they have conceded 15 goals from set pieces this season, which is the most in the Premier League. I think quite a few of them actually came in the first half of the season, especially. I think as the year went on, this was an area where Leeds did actually improve. I think defensively in general, you have to give Leeds plaudits for how they've gone ahead and transitioned over the years as they got those first teamers back into the squad. But yeah, 15 goals conceded from set pieces, an interesting stat nonetheless. Arsenal have made the fewest amount of tackles this season. They've only made 315 tackles this season, which is the lowest number in the Premier League. Now, this obviously tells us a couple of things. One of them is that Arsenal like to keep hold of the ball, and for that reason they don't then need to make all too many tackles, but also that they can be a little bit passive at times, and that maybe Arsenal need to be a little bit more aggressive in their defending to get on the front foot and things like that. So yeah, an area to look into there for Mikel Arteta. Spurs need to be less clumsy in and around the box. They've given away the most amount of penalties this season. 10 penalties Spurs have given away, which is absolutely criminal. A lot of people mentioned coming into this season the sort of Mourinho blueprint for his teams and how they're usually built on defensive stability, and if we looked sort of individually into the defenders that Spurs have had for this season, it's an area which has really let them down ultimately. You know, they've got the league's top scorer and top assister in Harry Kane, and ultimately they've had nothing to show for this season other than a 7th place finish to get them into the Conference League. West Ham have scored the most amount of own goals this season, which I thought was an interesting one. They've scored 5 own goals this season, which is the most in the Premier League. They've also scored the fewest amount of penalties this season, only scoring 2. Leicester have conceded the most amount of goals on counter-attacks this season. They've conceded 6 goals from a counter-attack, which is the most in the Premier League, which I thought was quite interesting. Leicester obviously in consecutive seasons have gone ahead and finished 5th after spending the majority of the season in the top 4, gutting stuff in the end, but I think we saw them being a bit vulnerable from some of those counter-attacks on the final day against Spurs when they were throwing people forward, and ultimately Spurs managed to punish them on the break. Chelsea have been caught offside the most away from home so far this season, and they've been caught offside the second most amount of times in the league as a whole. I think it's fair to say that Timo Werner has contributed to a fair few of them. He's been caught offside 27 times this season. He is obviously that sort of striker who likes to play on the last shoulder of a defender and things like that. I can't imagine how many times Chelsea fans have celebrated one of his goals in the end, ultimately for it to be chalked off by VAR as he was stood in an offside position. If Werner manages to learn the offside rule going into next season, then he could be deadly, but judging off this season, that's a pretty big if. Liverpool have missed the most big chances in the Premier League this season, and obviously the caveat that needs to come along with this stat, to miss a lot of big chances you also need to create a lot of big chances, but 68 big chances Liverpool have missed this season, which is the most in the Premier League. We've seen, really apart from Salah, Firmino and Mane not have their best seasons, especially in terms of goal scoring and their sort of composure in front of goal and things like that. Salah has been really the player of that front three who's been dragging them at times with his goal return this season. Liverpool have also registered the most amount of inaccurate crosses this season with 691 inaccurate crosses, which I thought was quite interesting. Obviously this is because Liverpool tend to cross the ball a lot, but an interesting stat nonetheless. Manchester United have paid the most amount of money in wages this season to ultimately not go ahead and win any silverware. Now, they've had a fair few chances. I think we can all agree, despite them finishing second in the league, they were never really in contention, apart from those very early stages, to go ahead and win the league. As soon as Man City started going on that winning streak, I think we all gifted the title to them. But otherwise, there were some decent chances for Man United to pick up silverware this season, none more so than that Europa League final. But it just wasn't to be David De Gea's day, was it? As he couldn't save any of the penalties and ultimately missed his to ensure that United went trophyless for, I think, a 4th consecutive season now. And finishing off with Manchester City, who have won the fewest amount of aerial duels this season in the Premier League, only winning 485. Obviously, this goes without saying that Man City probably don't face too many aerial duels per 90 as they hold on to the ball for so much of the game. You know, the occasions are quite few and far between this season when Man City have really been on the back foot and teams have been bombarding them with balls coming into the box and things like that. But even so, it was one of the few stats that I came across when Man City were at the bottom of the pile. But guys, there we have it. That will now wrap it up for today's video. If you did go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like. It is always massively appreciated. Do stay tuned on the channel for loads of regular content which is coming your way over the next few weeks and months. If you did go on to enjoy, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. But apart from that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.